Well, howdy there, partners. Mosey on over and join us for Bible Stories by the Campfire.
Have you ever been asked to do something really strange? Well, that's what happened to Joshua today in our Bible story. You see, in the Bible, starting in Joshua chapter 6, we find that things had drastically changed for the Israelites after they wandered in the desert for 40 years. Now, there were new, younger Israelites with a new leader, a man named Joshua. Now, Joshua had been one of the 12 spies who originally investigated the Promised Land 40 years earlier. Joshua had proved himself to be a good leader who was willing to obey God. Now, 40 years after Joshua had first seen the Promised Land, he was back. And the land was just as good as it always been. And this time, the Israelites were ready. They were finally entering into the land that God had promised them. But they hit their first obstacle. You see, there were already people living in the Promised Land, the Canaanites. And there were a lot of them in a strong city called Jericho. Now, Jericho was a city designed to handle an attack. It had a huge wall surrounding it and protecting all the people inside. And when the Israelites approached, that city was shut up tight. The Israelites had no way to break down that wall. They needed some help. And that's when God gave Joshua some instructions. He didn't tell Joshua to fight the people of Jericho. He didn't tell him to even try and climb that wall. God's instructions were kind of strange. He told Joshua to have the people march around the city one time every day for 6 days. Then, on the 7th day, they would march around the city 7 times, blow their horn, and yell at the city really loud. God said if they did that, the city would collapse, and the Israelites would be able to go right in and take over. Now, instructions don't get much stranger than that. Shouting at a city doesn't usually do anything. However, Joshua knew that God had great plans for them. So even though the instructions were strange, he obeyed. Joshua told all the people what God had said for them to do, and they started to march. They went around the entire city blowing their horns the whole time. No one said a word while they marched. And when they finally finished, the Israelites went back to their camp. And on the 2nd day, they got up early and marched around the city again, just like before. The priests blew their horns and the people marched. Again, no one talked. They marched around that city again on the 3rd day, and they did it again on the 4th day. And on the 5th day, they marched around that city again. When the 6th day came, you guessed it, they marched around the city again. And finally, on the 7th day, they marched around the city not once, not twice, not even 3 times. No, they marched around that city 7 times. And when they finished marching, the priests let out a long blast from their horn, and all the people shouted. All of a sudden, the walls of Jericho collapsed. God had performed a miracle for the people, and they rushed into that city and conquered it. You know, the Israelites went on to fight many more other battles, and eventually they divided up the Promised Land and lived there. You see, God truly had great plans for the Israelites. He had the Promised Land set aside for them all along. But it was only when they were obedient to God that they were able to experience it. In the same way, God has great plans for us when we are obedient to Him. Thanks for joining me for Bible Stories by the Campfire.
Thank you for joining us for Bible Stories by the Campfire.